Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prame, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on your Thursday edition of the show. We are almost to kickoff, almost to game day. It's a big game. Oregon is 8th in the country. Utah is 13th in the country. The Ducks are 6.5 point favorites, 6-point favorites going into this one. You look at the past 4 conference champions. It's these two teams. They've each won it twice in the last 4 years. Utah, I believe, has played in the conference championship game dating back outside of the COVID season of 2020, dating back to 2018, 18, 19, 21, 22. It's a game. This is where I'm going to start here. It's a game that's big, but yet it doesn't even come close, in my opinion, to the hype of Oregon-Washington. Maybe that's the rivalry factor between those two schools. Game day's going to be here in Salt Lake City for this game. But we've talked about it when we go to interviews, and no one's disrespecting or overlooking Utah, but it just feels just different. It doesn't, this is the biggest game of the week, and yet it doesn't carry the same weight, and that's just kind of confusing to me. I don't know if that's hit you guys at all, if you thought about that at all. It just doesn't seem like nearly as much buzz as 2 weeks ago at Washington.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, in terms of comparing it. I don't think you're wrong. And I think obviously you touched on the rivalry component of it with Oregon and Washington, what that means. I do think, and this is probably unfair because, as we'll talk about in this podcast, Utah has really performed well this year. I do think Utah being without Cam Rising and the way that they lost to Oregon State has probably diminished some of the kind of the national buzz in terms of what they are. But this game should mean a lot. I hope it feels like it means a lot. And reading the message board and the YouTube comments, it seems like Oregon and Utah fans are both really excited about this game and have a lot of mutual respect for each other in terms of the programs. And maybe that's just part of it too, is that part of the Oregon-Washington buildup is just the amount of disdain and dislike for those two programs, where Utah and Oregon have, some shared history of games going. Oregon knocks Utah out of the college football playoff race in 19. Obviously, Utah does the same in 21. Last year, it looks like Oregon knocks Utah out of the conference championship race. Of course, Utah ends up still going because of how things played out after. But these games always mean a lot, and I still think that's the case this year, where really the loser of this game is going to have a really tough road to make a conference championship, and is of course completely eliminated from a college football playoff standpoint. And the winner puts themselves in a pretty good spot. Obviously, nothing guaranteed, but a pretty good spot to be one of those two teams in Las Vegas in the early week of December. So. Yeah, I guess maybe it does feel a little bit less, but I think it shouldn't. I think this game should feel really significant because this is aside from Washington, this has been the biggest rival for Oregon.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be.
Right.
I don't know, just a weird vibe around this week.
Yeah, I think it just goes from more of a national perspective of how we feel about this, the media that we consume, and I don't want to get all theoretical on everybody here on the podcast, but the Washington-Oregon game had better storylines. I think it's just as simple as that. Bo Nix versus Michael Penix. It's a long-time rivalry. Oregon and Utah have been rivals for, since I've been in college, and a little bit further, earlier than that. But it's really picked up in the last 5 years, and that's great. That's a budding new rivalry, just as the end of the Pac-12 starts. So even better. But the Washington-Oregon game, that's a real rivalry game. Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Heisman hopefuls, Heisman candidates, a top 10 matchup, mind you. Even though Utah is 13th, it means a lot more when you're 8-9, or 7-8, or whatever they were a couple weeks ago. Just a grander stage on ABC. Maybe it's different if it's on Fox. I don't know. But they got the A teams regardless. It's still a ginormous game, don't get me wrong. And from the Oregon perspective of how players are reacting, yeah, I think it's I don't know. They didn't have too much big of a reaction for the Washington week either. This is just another game for them. That's what Dan always says. It's the next game is the biggest game. Every game means exactly the same, which is a good perspective to have if you're a football coach, but clearly he's lying to us because there are games that mean more than other games. Portland State did not mean as much as this matchup this weekend will mean, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think everybody has been pretty ho-hum, subdued, even during the Washington week. Maybe we just got more exciting athletes to talk during the Washington week than we have this week. No disrespect to those who we did talk to. You can find out who we did by going on our website and connecting the dots, Pepe Silva style. But I think it's just kind of the state of the program. No, like not too many highs, not too many lows.
Maybe it's just it's just the impending defensive slugfest that we're going to get. Whereas Washington week, it was, oh boy, it's going to be a shootout. And look, offensive shootouts are way more exciting than defensive shootouts for most people. I know there are those psychos out there that sit down and
I'm one of them.
Love a 7-3 victory.
I do. I love Iowa.
But maybe that's it, because look, both these defenses are elite. Dan Lanning came out and said like this is the one that he respects the most because of what they do. They're very similar in terms of just how they suffocate whoever they play. They're built kind of the same ways, and this was the case too back when Mario Cristobal was the head coach. Strength on strength, and we're gonna get better defensive performances this week than we'll see probably the rest of the year. Maybe when they play Oregon State, from an Oregon perspective. But you look across the board, and it's like you have to be prepared for. Look, Oregon's averaging 550 yards. That's probably not going to happen.
No,
it would probably be a shock if they hit 450 or 485 yards. Asking Bo Nix to throw for 325 feels like that's going to be a very high bar that's going to be tough to reach. Oregon averages, I can't remember the exact point total per game, but they're one of the highest scoring teams in the country. And to think that they're going to score 45 in this game feels outrageous. And it's going to be a clash, and there's going to be a bunch of storylines to watch. I don't know about you guys, but I am really curious to see how Oregon blocks Ellis of Utah. Leads the conference in sacks with 10, is a tremendous edge player, came on last season for the Utes. And we've seen Oregon's offensive tackles in the past have some struggles. Whether it's pre-snap with false starts at Texas Tech, or whether it's like last week where a Johnny Cornelius had like 4 or 5 mistakes on his part. Now, some of them were, RPOs, and he was downfield on a throw, thinking they had ran the football. But Oregon's going to be facing one of the elite pass rushers in the conference, in the country. They're going to be playing in a hostile environment that has to be accounted for. And we've seen Oregon's tackles kind of at times, not the entire season because they played really well other times, but at times show some weaknesses. Bo Nix could get hit quite a bit in this game. He probably will get hit quite a bit in this game, whether those are sacks or pressures.
And I think a lot of that could be he could get hit on runs too. We'll get to predictions later, but I wouldn't be surprised if Bo is a little bit more involved in the run game. I think it is this will be one of the kind of things to focus on for me is, kind of how does Oregon withstand what Utah does up front? We've talked all season about how good this offensive line has been, despite all of the, personnel changes from a year ago. New tackles, 1 new guard, new center. That's not nothing. And they've held up really, really well, but this will undoubtedly be the biggest test to date without question. And Utah is going to be, I think, undoubtedly the best defensive front Oregon will face in conference play all season. So I'm curious about that part, just because I think if we're talking about kind of the path to victory for Oregon centered around a quick start, and if they start slow, and some of this is what we've seen against Texas Tech, we saw it last week, even a little bit against Washington State, where you get in your own way, you slow down drives, maybe you kill your own momentum and you're forced to punt or settle for field goals. et cetera, et cetera. That's the path to keeping the game mucky enough for the Utes to kind of hang around. Because I think if Oregon comes out and plays an A+ first half offensively and just scores touchdown after touchdown after touchdown, like the Utes aren't going to be able to withstand that. And obviously, I don't expect that Oregon's going to like go 5 for 5 in the first half with touchdowns. That's extremely unlikely. But if they're able to score and have some success early, and the offensive line's able to do its job, like that's the recipe for success. But if there are, to Matt's point, hiccups with whether it be pre-snap, whether it be post-snap, managing Ellis, managing all the different rush components that they have there, Fillinger, some of these other guys, like that's where this one becomes a little bit of a different sort of game for Oregon. So I do think it starts there. And then on the other side, I know, Jared, you pulled this up, so I'll let you kind of share some of this, but USC's defense was able to really impact Utah's front, and the pass blocking was kind of put in a spot where you went, like, that's kind of unusual for Utah to be struggling as much as they were up there. So that's, I think, on the flip side, when Oregon's defensive front is on the field, was what can they do to even impact Bryson Barnes and that Utah offense more?
For sure. I wanted to quickly touch on Jonah Ellis. I think he's going to be likely Connerly's guy to deal with on Saturday afternoon. He's mostly at the right outside linebacker position, which is the reverse of the offensive line. So it means it's going to be left tackle. But he was pretty multiple against USC. I was looking at his snaps by position the other day. He played like 28 snaps at right, 17 at left outside linebacker, some defensive line buzz too. But he's 6'2", 246. I don't know. He's not going to really be putting a hand down and going to work there. He's going to use his speed and his athleticism to get around the edge. But anywho, going back to Utah's offensive line, just some interesting stats. I hadn't really looked at this before this week, and maybe that's just because, well, they are playing Utah, so I might as well do some deep digging. But they've allowed 80 pressures this year. It's a good amount. Spencer Fano, who's a true freshman, who an Oregon target, as starting at left tackle this season for Utah, has allowed a team high and at 14 pressures total this year. There seems to be an opportunity for Oregon's defensive front to get to the quarterback. Now, we did say that last week against Washington State. All three of us were very adamant towards the fact that this could be a repeat performance like it was against Colorado. It was not. They did end up having a good amount of sacks, but Cam Ward was still very squirrely, 6 sacks to be precise. Thank you, Eric. Very squirrely lad, threw for over 400 yards. So it wasn't really as similar as the Colorado defensive performance where they held the entire team to under, was it 201 yards, 200 yards, whatever it was. But this is a case where Utah's offensive line, at least by the numbers, doesn't look great. Now, I've watched a lot of Utah games. I enjoy watching Utah games. They're probably like my second favorite team to watch in the Pac-12. Eye test wise, doesn't look terrible. I still feel like they hold true. I think they did a pretty good job, like even against Florida way back when. That was week 1, so they've clearly developed since then. But again, this sometimes the pass blocking grades always kind of come down to the quarterback. Like if they are inexperienced and run into tackles or run into sacks, then that's going to harm the grades of the offensive linemen. And Bryson Barnes is getting there. He needs a lot more games, but he's slowly progressing through his experience in college football. He's getting more comfortable in the pocket. So I think there's opportunities here for Oregon to go about and get to the quarterback and apply pressure. I'm just, frankly, if I'm Oregon, I'm more concerned that they just try their hardest not to throw the ball, because I've talked about this multiple times now on this podcast where I'm not entirely sure how good Oregon's run defense is. And I still don't, because they haven't really played a team this year that's any good at running the ball. Yet some of the teams looked not bad at running the ball. And maybe the implementation of Justin Jacobs at the interior linebacker position is going to help that run defense, and we'll definitely be finding out on Saturday. But can he save it? Because Utah's offensive line, for as maybe as bad as they look on our friends at Pro Football Focus, they look pretty good in run blocking, and they always have been. And all these previous meetings between Oregon and Utah has been a lot of run-heavy offenses, and they've done a good job at that. So, again, that's the thing I'm most intrigued about seeing heading into Saturday. But this pass rush potential for Oregon is there. They got a good line, but we'll see what the protection looks like for Utah, because they always do a good job of game planning every single game for an opposing team's defense.
I feel like, for me, the storyline for this game is going to be Oregon's going to stack the box, and like Jared said, they're going to just straight up dare Utah to throw the football and beat you in one-on-one coverage. They've only thrown 7 total touchdowns this season. They've got some talent at the receiver spot. Money Parks is their deep threat. Landon King has kind of emerged as their new tight end, if you will, the last couple of weeks with a couple touchdowns. But they don't have their passing game isn't something that you look at and go, oh my God, this is going to be scary. How do we stop this?
Right. Oregon's played some really good pass offense. This is not one of them.
Yes. And Oregon, I really think this game's going to be decided upon how many guys can Oregon put into the box and get away with and still be able to defend the pass. Like if they can basically put 8 guys in the box and just dare Utah to throw the football with 3 defensive backs truly in the, preparing for the pass, and you're going to have guys cover out of the backfield and whatnot. But like if they put 8 guys in the box and they can contain Utah's rushing attack, I just don't know how Utah's going to be able to move the football effectively without winning these one-on-one situations. And I don't know if they can. But I don't know if, like to Jared's point, I don't know if Oregon can consistently stop this rushing attack. Even with 8 guys in the box, Jaquindon Jackson is a running back they haven't faced all year. He's like 6'2", 230 pounds. And then you throw in now the element of Sione Vaki from safety to running back, and they've got some different types of dudes that can do different types of things. Utah killed USC with the wheel route with Vaki. Alex Grinch said, like, wow, we've not seen that on film. And then fans went and found like clips of them running the wheel route all game, the previous game against Cal. But their running backs are different styles, and they're really talented. And that, to me, is just where this game's to be won or lost. Can Oregon load the box with as many guys to get away with defending the pass and stop the run?
And to sort of speak kind of a nugget here that sort of illustrates kind of why you could be uncertain about Oregon's run defense. And I think from a personnel perspective, before I even mention this, like I really like what Oregon has in its front 7 right now, especially with Jacobs. This feels like a perfect game for him to play like 40 to 50 snaps just because of the type of opponent you're playing. This is, as Casey Rogers said, as close as you get to Big Ten football on the West Coast. Justin Jacobs obviously cut his teeth at Iowa in the Big Ten. So there's some parallels there. But the point I was going to make is Oregon's played 6 FBS opponents this year. 5 of them are in the or 100th or worse, I should say, against the run or running the football this year. And 3 of them are among the 7 worst rush offenses in the country, including Hawaii, which is last. Now, I'm not including efficiency as much as I'm talking about total yardage, which is, of course, how you kind of measure that Oregon is the 12th best rush defense. I think Oregon is 26th in terms of rush efficiency, which is yards per carry. But my point is Oregon's played 6 teams that really matter this year. Only Texas Tech is like a good run offense. I think they're like in the top 50. The other 5 are all like pretty bad rush offenses, and 3 of them are like 3 of the worst 10 in the country. So that is kind of one of the things you have to have a consideration for when you look at the numbers. Because again, Oregon statistically, if you were to pull up the stats, you'd say, wow, like this is going to be good on good without question. Like this Oregon defense against the run is one of the best in the country. This Utah rush offense is one of the more consistent. They don't really have a lot of explosive plays if you go look through the numbers, but they are extremely committed to the run, very successful at the run. There's a reason Jaquindon Jackson like 20 or more carries the last 2 weeks, and those are both wins. And you go, oh, this is going to be a total slugfest here. I still think it will be, but to Jared and Matt's point as well, like I also think you have to acknowledge like Oregon really just hasn't faced any. Like this is going to be the real measuring stick for how good this run defense really is.
Shout out to late kick for that stat too, Eric. You see that?
I saw that's how I started the research and then pulled out the bottom part. But yeah, I heard him say that too.
Yeah, no, it's a good stat. And I think I agree with you. It's a true barometer of what it's going to be like. It's a little different from how Oregon played Utah last season because everybody knew that Cam Rising wasn't going to be running the ball because he was hurt earlier in the season in 2022. I feel like it's more similar to Oregon State last season where they just started to run the ball. And Oregon's rush defense heading into that game was one of the best in the Pac-12, if not the best. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I think they were third, is my recollection.
Sure. And they were not third, second, or first after the game.
Sure
And I'm not saying that that's going to happen again, but hear me out. Utah, if they feel like they don't have to throw the ball at all to score, they're not going to throw the ball. Their lowest passing yard this year was a 14-7 win against UCLA, where they threw 17 times for 117 yards, ran for 102. So A, really ugly game. But B, if they don't feel like they need to throw the ball, they're not. And Oregon, I think, knows that. And so maybe they do try to stack the box. Utah always is they always pull out like trick plays, just like cute little plays to the sidelines here or there in situations like these where everybody's like, oh, they're going to hard nose, physical, just destroy the front of your football team type. But then they come out, little flea flicker, little wide receiver pass, something like that. So they're going to stay multiple. They're going to stay versatile. And Oregon's going to have to adjust. But I do think that this could be a big, hey, this is why we went and got Justin Jacobs in the transfer portal game.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of excited to see that because I love Justin Jacobs. I think he's a great linebacker. It's a shame that he's been hurt this year.
I was just going to say, I feel like this is maybe a team Oregon defensively matches up with better. Like Utah doesn't try and motion all over the place, and they don't try and they don't try and like spread you out like Washington does with 4 or 5 wide receivers, and then all of a sudden, motion a guy into the backfield and hand it off to Dylan Johnson. Like they're not a true spread team. I don't want to call them like old school football, but like they're kind of
some of the principal concepts definitely are.
Yeah, it's like mid 2000s NFL football. Hey, we're gonna run it up the middle.
Yeah, and I think that's into Oregon's strength defensively, where like they've got a bunch of dudes who can play really well in the box. And if this is a game that's going to be played in the box, I think it matches up a little bit better for Oregon. And that's maybe why we could maybe see Oregon's defense perform well against the run. Like, because I agree, like they haven't shown it. The stats show it. We talked about it at Washington. Like that first half, they were running the ball effectively. So maybe that's something to watch. I don't know. Maybe it's not true at all, and they just get thrashed. We've seen that happen before. We've gone into this game confident they were going to win, and they get blown out. I'm not confident, like super confident they're going to win. I do think they do. Spoiler alert, but this is just one of those games where you have to go in, and then nothing's going to be pretty. And so if you're upset that Oregon doesn't have 21 points midway through the first half, like you're too high of expectations, even for Oregon when they're elite. Like you have to acknowledge that this is a tough place to play. And this is a tough team to move the football along. Do we want to take a break, or do we have any offensive discussion points?
I don't know if Jared has an offensive discussion point. I had a quick question I wanted to pose, but
I think the only offensive discussion point for me is handling the pass rush, which we kind of touched on with Jonah Ellis. Yeah. And then just can anybody other than Troy Franklin against a good defense perform well? That's the other question mark I've had, because it seems like in these bigger games, like Troy Franklin gets his, which is great, but Oregon's going to need a number 2 this week around, because if Utah's smart, they just go and double team Troy every single down, and that's when Tez Johnson or Gary Bryant, who's been very limited in the pass game recently, Trayshawn Holden as well, also very limited in the pass game. Just need one of those guys to step up and provide Bo Nix another option to throw to, because against Washington, it got a little hairy there for a second, where it was Troy or bust, basically on a lot of passing down. So that was my other offensive discussion point real quick.
It's a good one. Against Washington State, we saw Tez emerge with Troy having quote unquote a down game. He still had like 4 catches for 80 yards.
Yeah.
But No, you're
just
right.
against a better squad.
Yeah, against a better defense. How does that look? Oh, the question I wanted to pose was this: like, in terms of like, we're about to do predictions after the break. I think of the teams Oregon has played this year, Utah is like the most difficult one to sort of predict an outcome against, because if you really look through all of this, like there's an outcome where you just say, like, Oregon seems like they should be better in a lot of these areas that are really significant. But then I also go, it's at Utah, it's Kyle Whittingham. These guys just don't turn in duds. So like, you could tell me just based upon the certain matchups on the field, like, oh yeah, Oregon should be able to take advantage of that and win convincingly. But I would also feel silly predicting that. So my question, I guess, is like, do you find Utah to be kind of one of the more difficult teams to talk about in terms of what you're getting from them in this particular matchup? Not that you think Utah is an inconsistent team, but just like the highs and the lows of what they can be. And I bring that up in part because Matt and I were at a sports bar down in the Bay Area when when Utah played at Oregon State, and it was just really ugly. And you watched the way they played Baylor, and they snuck that one out. That was a really ugly football game. They were very fortunate to win. At the same time, I also just watched them score a lot of points against USC, and I know USC is not very good
Who among
defensively,
us?
but
Who hasn't?
but that offense looked a lot more effective. So my point is really like, if you go through the games that I have watched them play this year, I've just seen a lot of different. Like, I watched them look really impressive against Florida in the debut, look kind of crappy against Baylor, look really bad against Oregon State, and then these last couple of games, like, oof, that's a different animal. So it's a hard team for me because I could convince myself we're going to get into predictions like Oregon's going to win, like this is going to be a statement game. But I'm also like, I'm not totally convinced that they win this game either, because the Utes just always have something that they just kind of have those intrinsic values that pop up and you go, man, like, I didn't expect that thing to happen. And that was the storyline for the game.
They just play ugly and they win ugly. That's like their brand of football. We're going to make this an ugly game. And can you weather the storm to make it through it? Like, even the 24-11 win week 0, whatever it was, against Florida, like, that was
an
ugly.
ugly win.
Yeah, like
they had 270 something yards of total offense. It's bad. Like, that was ugly.
I mean, they just vice gripped Florida's offense. They couldn't, Utah themselves struggled, offensively at times. That Baylor game, I remember that with Eric, and weren't they, Eric? Like, didn't they have like 7 points before that's like 6-minute mark of the fourth quarter or something crazy like that?
They scored right at the very, very end. And I don't know if they'd scored until the last half of the fourth quarter. I think they were down 7-0.
Yeah. So like, even some of these impressive wins have been ugly, and they have three wins this season by less than a score, or by a touchdown or less. And that, that's the sign of a good team, being able to pull out close victories and make the plays needed late to come back and win. But yeah, like I agree, Eric. Like, this is a hard team to pick because they do some things really well, but they also have some clear warts. But yet, they're hands down the best coached team in the conference. I don't think that, in my opinion, I don't think that's. There's a better team that's more prepared or better developed or better in-game coached than what Utah gets with Whittingham and his staff. And that's why they win, because they play sound football. It may not be pretty football, but they make very few mistakes, and they play a physical brand, and they just make the game ugly. And can you win that?
Yeah, I actually think Utah games are quite easy to predict. They're going to be close. They don't not show up unless they're significantly better than their opponent. These games are always going to be close, and I expect another close one this weekend. I agree with you, Eric, where it's like, by the numbers, Oregon is there could just be a blowout. If Oregon finds their rhythm on offense and scores on 5 of the first 6 trips down the field and is up 31-7 at one point, like, it's going to be really difficult for Utah to get back in the game, or even just 21-0.
It's hard for anybody, right? It's hard for anybody.
It's hard for anybody, but it's incredibly hard for a team who's, averaging, I had this written down here somewhere, 345 yards of total offense per game, which is 11th in the Pac-12. And that's after 2 weeks of 440 plus yard games against Cal and USC. I can see that perspective. And I'm not saying it won't ever happen, but I'd be really surprised if it would happen because this defense is damn good. And I know Oregon's offense is damn good, but it's not like Oregon has played incredible teams defensively either this year. There's certainly been some teams that are not good at it all, but Oregon at least has shown the ability to move the ball in every single game. And obviously their stats are a little inflated by that Portland State game, especially at this point of the year. But they still put up 541 yards in back-to-back weeks. I don't care who you're playing. That's pretty darn good. And so there is that perspective on this game, but I just don't think Utah is going to get kind of not blown out, but I don't think they're going to get pushed around like that. It's going to be. No, I get it. I know you weren't saying that.
Just to clarify.
No, I understand. No, but I just think it's still going to be close, and that's why I think predicting Utah games. Not that it's easy, but you're going to get an A game from Utah every time they step out on the field. They're one of the most consistent teams I've seen play under a head coach for many, many years. And I wanted to make this point earlier, but I kind of forgot. I'll bring up another question before we go to break, so everybody gets to listen to our dumb voices just for a couple minutes more.
Cool.
If Utah was 100% healthy, meaning Yasmin, Rising, Keithy, blah, 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 this is a top 10 team, right?
Oh, yeah. No question.
Top 5?
Maybe. Yeah, probably. They would be undefeated right now, I think.
I agree. So this would be a top 10 matchup. We were talking about the hype around a program, or a game week. That would be a hyped up week. That would be a game day experience like it is going to be this week. But I just wanted to bring that up. This is a good team, and they're missing significantly important players. So,
to Jared's point, real quick about Utah always coming to play. The last time they've lost a game by more than 2 touchdowns, December 31st, 2019 against Texas, and December 6th, 2019 against Oregon. They don't get blown out.
Are you not including bowl games?
No, I did look at bowl games.
Am I wrong in the last Rose Bowl?
They lost that game,
State, right?
35-21, 14 points.
Okay.
By more than.
Yeah, no, you're right. I in my head I thought that was more lopsided than that, to be honest.
Yeah. They always come to play, and everything's pretty much. They always have a chance. It feels like, at least going into the fourth quarter. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we'll start diving into some bold predictions and more here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Bold prediction time. Not another good week for us. Last week, collectively, we went 1 for 12.
Who got it?
Not good there.
What was our main?
Who was the one?
I got 1 point.
For what was the? I'm trying. I genuinely don't remember what we did.
4 or more sacks. They had 6.
You got it.
Yeah.
We also, all 3 of us lost on the point spread. We all won straight up.
Oh,
We
yeah.
all lost because
Some
of that late
spread.
Stupid Cam Ward trying to score touchdowns in the last minute of a football game.
All right. Offensive team prediction here. Bo Nix has been protected really well this season. He's just been sacked 4 times. That ranks 2nd nationally. Utes are tied for 7th with Oregon, by the way, in sacks forced this season with 25 through 7 games. While I expect Bo Nix to have a good game, to make some big plays, I do think he's going to feel pressure. And I'm going to put down Oregon's offensive line allowing 2 or more sacks in this football game.
That would be significant. I don't believe they've allowed 3 since Dan Lanning has arrived, because I think they've allowed like 10 now in 19 games or whatever it is. Yeah. That's a good one to touch on too. Another one of those things we talked about earlier in the show that I'm going to make a prediction based around. I think Utah has not allowed more than 146 yards rushing all season, and that was against USC last week. I think Oregon's going to be the first team over 150 on the ground against the Utes. Obviously, Oregon has proven to be among the best rush offenses in the country, and I do think this is like, we've talked about it all week. This is one of those matchups that's really going to decide this one. I think Oregon's going to have some success running the football, 150 yards on the ground or more. Last year, Oregon won despite, I think, only rushing for, was it 59 yards? If Oregon,
Yeah.
if Oregon, if that's the number this year, I think it's going to be really, really unlikely that they win. But I think 150 or more on Saturday.
Yeah, and I had the same thing. I just had 146 because it was one more than 145. So,
you going to share this one?
Yeah, let me look. Maybe I'll say that they went higher than Weber State for passing yards at 66. So, I think we're just going to share this one, Eric.
Jared,
if you want an easy one, I was going to do the most yards allowed for, or the most yards put up against Utah's defense.
Total yards.
What was the
number?
Yeah,
just so we don't share. I'll do total O over 401.
I was going to suggest that if we did share it, you take the 146, I take 150, but because it'll probably be like 149 yards or something like that, rather than right in between. But yeah, total yards.
Price is right, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, sorry, I forgot that we did the snake thing. So I've got Bo Nix here finishing with the highest completion percentage against Utah this season for my offensive player prediction. The highest that they actually allowed was against Florida. Fun fact, 70.5%. I think that was Graham Mertz who did that, 31-44 for 333 yards and a tut. Obviously, we're very, very well aware about Nix's consistency this season. I don't know what his completion percentage is right now, but it's pretty high. It's probably closer to 80 than it is to 70, if I had to guess. Good preparation by me, and I think that continues this week against Utah. So, highest completion percentage versus Utah this season for Bo Nix.
Bo is at 78.4%, and fun fact, Graham Mertz is third nationally at 76.2. So,
big Graham.
Two of the most accurate
Wisconsin legend.
There you go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not having it's been a trying season for a lot of players, I think, in Gainesville. All right. I'm going to also do a Bo Nix prediction, and I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think that they're going to need to find multiple ways to incorporate Nix in the run game, in the pass game, but I think particularly, like, we just haven't seen Oregon be aggressive using him. I also think there are going to be some runs based out of necessity where he is chased in the pocket because, as we've talked about, like, this is Utah front is going to cause more problems than anybody Oregon's faced this year without question in terms of getting to the quarterback and impacting throws. So I think Nix is going to run 10 or more times this game. He hasn't run more than 9 all season. That was against Texas Tech. I don't know. I think some of it'll be design stuff just because I think they're going to want to find a way to manufacture some success, and they're going to want to find a way to force Utah's defense to at least like respect the possibility that Nix could keep it on some of these RPO plays. And we haven't seen as many RPOs this year, by the way. I don't think as at times a year ago, and certainly Nix hasn't kept it very often. I think this is a game where you see him keep the ball a little bit more. So I think 10 or more rushes in this game for Bo.
I'm also sticking with Bo in this one.
It's a Bo week.
It's a Bo week. The most yards Utah has allowed passing in the Pac-12 game this season is 256. Last weekend to Caleb Williams in that win over the Trojans. I think we're obviously going to see more than 256 yards passing in this game by Bo Nix. 333 is the season high, which came from Florida. That feels too high. I don't think Bo hits 300 yards passing in this game. So I'm going to go he hits 265 or more and sets a Pac-12 high in passing yards against the Utah defense this season. All right, defensive team. Oregon is 7th in the country in sacks. We talked about that before. I referenced that. The Utes have made a couple changes along the offensive line. We've got a new center in there. They're shuffling around. They've got a true freshman at left tackle and Spencer Fano. I think Oregon's going to stack the box. I think we're going to see some blitzes when it's a clear passing down to really just get after Bryson Barnes, and we're gonna see some sacks. I think Bo Nix gets sacked. I've already said that. I think Bryson Barnes is also going to get sacked. Give me 3 or more sacks for this Oregon defense against Bryson Barnes, who is a sneaky, elusive player. That run at USC to get that first down was really impressive. He's not Cameron Ward, but he's going to be tough to get down. But I think Oregon gets him 3 times or more in this game.
I really like Bryson Barnes a lot, and I'm really excited to see how he faces up against an Oregon front that I do think will put him under duress more than he's probably seen most Saturdays this season. It's going to be really fascinating to see how he handles that. And that kind of leads to the prediction I'm making, which is that I think Oregon's defense is going to force 2 or more turnovers in this game. Utah's only gave it away 4 times all year. And as we talked about on this podcast, obviously many times, Oregon's defense has really struggled to take the ball away. But I think this week's going to speak just to the randomness of how turnovers work in college football, where one of the teams, the second best team at protecting the football, which is Utah, behind Oregon, by the way, which is only at 1 all season, knocking on wood. I think, strangely, this is just going to be a game where Oregon gets a couple turnovers, and I think those turnovers are going to be really critical late. Again, mostly just because I'm speaking to the randomness to the fan base who are like, why aren't we forcing turnovers? Like, Utah's not a matchup where it feels like they should force turnovers. I think they're going to. And obviously last week was a weekend against Washington State where they were like one of the most turnover-prone teams in the conference, and they didn't force any. So that just speaks, I think, again, to just turnovers are random. It just comes down to what's happening. And again, game script-wise, I think if Oregon is playing with a lead and Bryson Barnes is forced to do some things, it's possible he puts a ball or 2 up in jeopardy just trying to make a play.
I like it. I mean, I've gone 0 for 4 this year in turnover predictions, so I stayed away.
Fair enough.
So credit to you for having the guts to do it while I do not. Let's hope that you're right for the sake of our standings. But my defensive team stat, I think Oregon's going to allow the most rushing yards they have all season this week to Utah. That would be 175, because Texas Tech gave 174 on Oregon's head in Lubbock. The second highest, get this, is actually Portland State, 148. Oregon's gone, what is that? Maths. 5 straight games without allowing over 100 yards on the ground, which is pretty impressive. But again, like, I'm not saying that, they're taking on Wisconsin with Monte Ball over here every single week. So it's been an up and down result. But when teams have had some success against Oregon running the ball, they've usually stuck with it. And I suspect that Utah will do exactly the same. And to Eric's point, maybe they don't want Bryson Barnes throwing this pigskin around a lot this weekend. So that's what I got. Allows the most rushing yards this season, over 174. And for the defensive player of the game, or defensive player predictions, excuse me, I think this is a first in the Autzen Audibles prediction segment of our podcast. I'm doing a parlay.
Okay,
that's right.
Do it.
Doing a 3 linebacker parlay. I've got Justin Jacobs over 6.5 tackles, Jeffrey Bossa over 1.5 tackles for loss, and Jamal Hill over half a sack. And I went through on Caesar Sportsbook because this is totally real, and it's plus 478 odds. So everybody have some fun there. But I just, like I talked about earlier, I just think that this is going to be a game where Oregon's linebacker play and how much bigger they got are going to be important. Like, Noah Sewell probably had his best game of the season last year against Utah, because that's an opponent that Noah Sewell knows what to do with and needs to stay inside the box, just kind of run downhill, go steamroll some people. With Hill, Jacobs, Bossa, even Bryce Betcher, I'm sure will get a decent amount of snaps this week. I like their upside here, and that's why I went with the 3-leg parlay.
Tempting numbers there too, plus 478. Did you lay any down there? I mean, that's
No. You can't bet on college football in Oregon, please, Eric.
Yeah, what's going on here?
I've never done that in
What
my
magic
life.
do you have, Eric, to consider that an
Yeah.
option?
Oh
We were of similar minds on this one. I was impressed with what we saw from Justin last week. I'm going to predict who leads the team in tackles.
Oh,
I think this is the exact kind of matchup you bring him in for, right? And James Crepea of the Oregonian tried to get Dan to basically say as much on Monday in terms of asking about bringing in transfer portal players that are a little bigger and stronger for these matchups. And of course, Dan wasn't really thrilled with that being the takeaway for why they recruited Justin for one football game. So he didn't buy into it. But I do think there is some validity to that fact of like, these are the type of games where you do need to be a little bigger and a little bit more physical. And that's what Justin is. And that's what he showed a week ago. And I think this is a game where you're going to see him play a lot. He already debuted playing, I think, the second most snaps for a linebacker a week ago. I think he and Jeff Boss are going to play a ton. I do agree that Jamal will probably be out there if it becomes more passing downs, but I think they're going to try to play Justin all the time on downs where it's expected to be runs, and that's going to be a lot of the downs if Utah is moving in the ball and having success.
I've also got a team prediction or a team high leader for tackle prediction. It's not a linebacker; it's actually a safety. Evan Williams. I think we're going to get I don't think he's going to get 14 like he did last week, which, by the way, Bennett Williams had 14 against Utah last season.
Cool stat.
Cool stat
Spider-Man
there.
meme.
I don't think Evan's going to get 14 tackles because I think this team's built around – they've improved. And players like Justin Jacobs will eat up tackles. But I think Oregon's going to load the box. I think Evan is that player that fits this – to that same kind of line of questioning. I think Evan is a player that fits this type of game. Why they brought him in. Physical safety, can make tackles, can make hits. He's here for cleaning up plays, the line of scrimmage. We saw that against Cameron Ward last week. I think we're going to see that again this week against Utah. So I don't have a number again, but I do have Evan Williams leading the team in tackles. All right, score prediction. Go ahead.
I've got one more. I've got a side bet here. Somebody in the comment section, tell me what to call this because I'll do this every once in a while. My own little side bet here or prediction. Oregon will commit its second turnover of the year.
Ooh.
I call it against Colorado. I've got a good feeling against Utah. Because second turnover.
Is it a fumble or an interception?
Most likely an interception. I'll just put it like that. I'm not sure if these running backs are humanly capable of fumbling because I think they're so afraid of Carlos Lachlan that if they fumble, their ass is grass. So, interception, second turnover of the year.
I have a suggestion for the name, and we've already used it other places, but this feels like a machination.
No, we can't do that. I wanted to call it the wacky, wavy, inflatable arm flailing tube man bet, but a little long.
Okay.
So someone in the comment section, help me out.
All right. Score predictions. Utah has played a couple of the better S&P defenses in the nation. Florida, UCLA, Oregon State. They've all struggled to score points, though, in those games. They put up 24 against Florida, but it was like grinding teeth, and they scored just 7 against UCLA and Oregon State. When they've played some really bad defenses, Utah has been able to score points and move the football, i.e. last week and the week before that against Cal when they scored 34 points in back-to-back weeks. Their bread and butter has been to run the football, and then I think Oregon kind of matches up with that a little bit. This style of offense, at least, how they deploy their players on the field. So I think Oregon's going to stack the box. They're going to dare Utah to throw. And then offensively, they're going to have some success against Utah defensively. And then offensively, I think Bo Nix has a good game. He is efficient with the football with what he does. He distributes it to his playmakers and lets them go to work. They make a couple deep shots connect, and that leads to a game that's going to be incredibly close throughout. I don't think either team really takes a 14-point lead in this game at any point. It's always basically going to be a one-score game. But the difference is Oregon scores a couple touchdowns where Utah has to settle for field goals because they get put in some third and long situations, and they just can't complete the pass. So give me Oregon 28, Utah 20. They cover, they win straight up, and they win a incredibly hard-fought football game.
Yeah, I've kind of outlined all week the possibility of like Oregon building a lead, playing with the lead. I don't know if this is a game where either team's really going to have control until the end. I expect this to be a pretty Matt and I's game prediction or score predictions are like basically identical against a go team. I have Oregon 27-20. But here's what I think happens. I think this game is going to be just a total slugfest, and it's going to be knotted for most of the game. And I think it's going to come down to Bo Nix is going to lead a game-winning drive at the end, and it's going to be a possible Heisman-ish moment. Failed to capitalize on the Heisman moment possibility against Washington, but going against this defense with game day present, Utah hasn't lost at home since 2018. I think is the stat I saw. I think this is an opportunity for Bo to make kind of a statement and lead a drive, and you come away saying like, okay, he's now at least he's got one Heisman moment. He's not the favorite by any means. He's still like what is he right now? Plus 3,000 or something, Matt? What was the gambling odds I saw?
Last week it was plus 3,000. I did see another number bump him up to plus 1,800, so it has improved a little bit. But you could get him at least last Sunday at plus 3,000.
So, again, not the favorite by any means, but I think a game like this perhaps is one that creates a little bit more Bo Nix for Heisman buzz with Oregon winning 27-20.
I really wanted to make this like a 10-7 game because I like both of these defenses a lot. I'm a big fan of rock fights, like old school AFC North, Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers, like 14-10. And I really wanted to do that, but I do think some points will actually be scored here. So I have Oregon 31-24, which is an over, and it's a bit higher than my colleagues here. But I do think that Oregon's going to find a way to score, and I think Utah has been in a better groove at their offense recently. I still don't think that they have the explosive capabilities to keep up with Oregon. So it'll all come down to whether Utah's defense can get multiple stops and/or multiple turnovers to Oregon's offense. And like Matt talked about, Bo Nix doesn't really do that. And I know I predicted an interception. I think there's going to be at least one. I'd be hard pressed to see Bo Nix throwing 2-3 interceptions in this game, even though I think Utah's secondary is vastly underrated. They're great against the rush, obviously, but the most that they've allowed this season passing yard is 333, which I know sounds like a lot, but in today's day and age in college football, not too many. It was also the first week of the season. They held Caleb Williams to, let me double check here, 256 yards. That's last year's Heisman winner. That was this year's Heisman hopeful for a long time. Probably the number one overall pick in the draft. So this Utah secondary is vastly improved from week one. I think it's going to prevent a lot of difficulties for Bo Nix in the passing attack and Troy Franklin as a wide receiver. But I still think that Oregon finds a way to move the ball on the ground, which is why my original offensive team stat prediction was the over 146 yards on the ground. I think that Nix does just enough. Maybe he doesn't throw for 300 yards, but like Matt's prediction was over 256, I think is more than acceptable. So I like Oregon to win this game. I really wanted to go like I said, like 14-7, 10-7, 14-10. Because I want it to be a slugfest. In my heart of hearts, I want it to be a slugfest. But I think both teams move the ball. So I'll take Oregon to cover the spread of 6.5 and win by 7 on the over, 31-24.
Eric, your Heisman update, it's all over the board. Bet365 has him at 2,500. Caesars has him at 900. And then BetMGM has him at 1,600. Point Bets has them at 14, and DraftKings has them at 1,300. So, I mean, if you can somehow bet 365, if you can get money on that app or betting line, whatever, do it. Plus, 2,500 is a lot. It's really high. Caesars is the lowest at plus 900, which still feels like solid value to at least put something on it if you're going to do that type of thing.
But we can't bet on college sports. So.
We can't bet on college sports.
So we won't be doing that. But if in a hypothetical world where one could.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. If you had like a VPN or something like that.
I mean, if
have.
such things exist, yeah.
I mean, I'll be in Vegas in 2 weeks. Maybe I'll go do it.
Might have already won it by then. Who knows?
That's very true. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Next time you hear from us, it'll be Saturday evening as we recap Oregon at Utah from Rice-Eccles Stadium. Until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.